Here's the aftermath of the maintenance on the engine so far. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about the difference between a car that lasted 150,000 miles versus another one that lasted only 100,000 miles. All right, so here we go, another F30. This is another 2012. It has 150,000 miles. Engine's really clean, and it failed. It had its timing chain guide go. It's a known problem on those 4-cylinder motors, but this car lasted 150,000 miles, whereas this car only lasted 97,000 miles. Now, the only difference between this car and the other car is the oil change intervals. You can tell just by taking the valve cover off and looking inside. Ultimately, these will fail at around 100,000 miles, but if you change the oil regularly, you can probably get much further. The engine's in perfect shape otherwise. So now some new information regarding these. If you're thinking of picking up an F30 and thinking of fixing it up, they are now subsidizing the timing chain kits, or at least you can buy everything you need to fix it for under a couple $100. I'm gonna put a link in the description for this new timing chain kit that has everything you need for under $200 in case you guys have an N20 and you're thinking of maybe proactively replacing the parts before they could ever go bad. And for this particular video, you're not going to see a thorough DIY. I'm going to time lapse it for entertainment purposes. I've covered this in detail in the past, so I will link to those videos in the description. This is just going to be a quick summary of what a car that's been maintained looks like and showing you how it doesn't run. I bought it in this condition, and then hopefully by the end of the video, you're going to see a complete transformation. The car's going to run. So we'll cut over to me attempting to start the car now, and then I'll catch up with you. Okay, before we start tearing into this car, we're going to give it a start. As you can see, it was almost going to catch, but the timing is off. When we checked it for codes, it was indicating that there's an issue with the exhaust cam. It's locked. So what I think is happening is the compression that's supposed to be built up inside the engine to allow it to start is getting leaked into the exhaust. And you can actually hear it out the tailpipe.
Oh yeah, it's party.
So out the tailpipe, you got a whole bunch of compression. Had it been staying in the engine instead of being overlapped and being pushed out the exhaust, the engine would fire. Took a bit of a gamble on this car, hoping that the rod bearings and main bearings and everything are going to be okay. It does sound healthy otherwise. As I said, I'm in the middle of the job, but if you see these parts here, they came apart pretty spectacularly, but that was probably a good thing because it couldn't fail slowly. It failed all abruptly, and it wasn't able to get sucked into the oil pickup. Timing was so off that the car would no longer run because that big trunk separated. Now on this car, it happened slowly and little bits got inside the pickup. I've covered that. This crankshaft is at a machine shop right now. Here's a case in point. 97,000 miles. We cleaned the rest of the engine and it's looking great, but this is sludge buildup. Generally speaking, the color of the head isn't that bad. There isn't that much varnishing, but at the same time, for 97,000 miles, you'd expect it to be almost silver. So I'd imagine that this was changed on average every 10,000 miles, and they waited for the car to prompt them to change the oil. Now this car in particular is actually very clean. All the bushings and everything look great. The headlights aren't faded. So I'd imagine this car was garage kept, probably had the majority of its miles as highway miles. I'm in the middle of the job right now, but here's what the engine looks like. Here's how the engine looks, pretty much silver. Here's the cylinder head on this car. Now if you take a look at the springs on the eccentric shaft, there's no buildup. So this car either was just mostly driven highway, and if they were following the computer's recommendation, the oil was changed on time, or they were a little bit ahead of the curve. That's why it lasted 150K. A good way to tell is it's going to look nearly silver if you pop the oil cap off versus gold or burgundy. So I don't want to put out redundant content, but I know some of you guys like seeing people wrench, and it's going to be just a really thorough time lapse to give you a sense of what's involved so it doesn't seem so daunting in case you want to attempt this yourself. I'd highly recommend, if you have 90,000 miles, you own one of these, consider getting the job done, especially since the parts are a lot cheaper now. But ultimately, I want to document the work that I do on these cars so that when I go to resell them, they look good, they're in good shape, and they get the top dollar, so I can prove the mechanical repairs. I'm going to do maintenance and whatever this thing needs, just like usual. It still needs a cleanup, but it's got heads up, a black interior, navigation, not a bad spec. So there's a sense of the difference between a 150,000 mile car and a 100,000 mile car. I don't really think they'll get much beyond that unless the oil is changed religiously, and you just got a little bit lucky in terms of your climate and not causing those chain rails to fail. So we'll cut over to me wrenching on the car, and then I'll come back to conclude after it's running. So we're gonna go ahead and give this engine bay a detail, and then we'll start the process of tearing into the motor. So I made this video as proof that the work was done on this car and also to show the condition. But ultimately, what we're showing here is that the job isn't too daunting. We can squeeze it all into one video, time-lapse through it. I've covered it in depth in other videos. I'll link to that in the description. All right, so there's a look at the bottom of the engine. The oil pickup is perfectly clean. This engine in general has been very well maintained because it's very light in color. It's silver, barely golden brown, no varnishing. It was very well maintained. That's the only way it got to 150,000 miles before this guide let go. But regardless, it'll either fail at 100,000 with lack of oil changes, or it'll fail at 150,000 if you don't do it. So even with good oil changes. But let me show you what happened inside. So we have 0 shavings, which is what we want to see. But you can see all these pieces of timing material. And that's why we lost timing. Bought this car not running. You saw at the beginning how it was turning over. White smoke out the back. Not making boost.
What do we got?
All right, so this car is getting a whole bunch of goodies in terms of maintenance. So we have new front suspension going in, new coils. It has new spark plugs. We have an air filter, brake pads, turbo install kit, coolant, rotors, and it's getting a brand new turbo. This has like not even hundreds of miles on it. It's basically brand new.
Hey everyone, Joel from Raleigh Motorsports here, and while Musa's gone, I'm gonna hijack his channel for a couple minutes and I'm gonna give today's lesson on being a better mechanic and being more efficient and more organized when you go to work on your car. And so first, I'm gonna show you how maybe a lot of you work on your cars, and then I will show you a way to become proficient. And the way that it used to work, what flat rate techs will call beating the book, back when I started working on cars in the early 90s on BMWs and Mercedes, the way you would do it, you would open up a physical book called Mitchell's made one, there's another one, we had a Mitchell's, but it was the Mitchell's Labor Estimating Guide, Cost and Labor Estimating Guide. And you would go to the vehicle, you'd look up the job, and it gives you an hours, billable hours as a guide. Now people use All Data, and there's Mitchell's Online, there's other ones. So when flat rate techs talk about beating the book, what they're talking about is getting the job completed faster than the book time charges, because you pay for the job, not the competency of the technician. So if they get it done, they still get paid for that job. If you ever want to beat the book, you're going to need to work very efficiently. And even if you don't care about beating the book, you're going to save yourself a lot of four-letter words, a lot of frustration if you can be a little bit more organized and efficient, and I'm going to show you how to do it right now. If you are used to working on cars and your working area looks like this, that's not how you want to do it, okay? So let's show you how you want to do it. If you're working on top of a car, underneath the hood, or you have a lift, this is the setup you want. You want to have a cart, not super expensive, and then at Harbor Freight they have these dividing trays. Here's an example of a way to set up your work area. You have little cubbies for all your bolts. So here I know this is all the belly pan trim pieces. This is all reinforcements for cross members and trim pieces up top. Then these are for exhaust. This is for the transmission. This is for turbo items. This is vacuum. And then we go over here and we have another dividing tray, and I have all my e-Torx in one area, all the Torx bits in one area, all the sockets in one area, and all the extensions. Extensions are your friend. Every time you can get little ones, they even have a shorter one that's even shorter than this, get them. Also, wobbles. Wobbles are your friend because they're gonna allow you a little bit of play and still they're better than universals, and it's all you need most of the time. We've got air ratchets, and then we've got regular ratchets and long extensions, and then we've got wrenches and some specialty tools, some picks and magnet tool, you'll need that. Now, if you've ever worked on your car and you'd be like, oh, where's the 10, where's the 13? Well, I know my sockets are here, so I'm gonna find them. That's how you want to organize your stuff, and that's how you won't lose bolts. The other thing is, well, what do you do if you're working on jack stands? Great question, I'm glad you asked. So if you're underneath the car and you're working on jack stands, Harbor Freight has a small rolling tray that you can get, and you can use that for your big tools, your ratchets and your long extensions and your cordless ratchets, the little baby impacts, whatever, and then you can still put trays underneath the car for all the bolts, and then you won't roll over them, you won't kick them and all that. And if you have kids and they like to help, the good thing about the metric system is they don't need to know anything about fractions, all they need to know how to do is count. The 13's not it, well, can you hand me the 14? And then they can be it's not just holding the flashlight, they can actually be involved, and you would be really surprised how handy their little tiny fingers can come in to grab a bolt that you may have dropped. So that's it for today's lesson, really, is getting an efficient work area, stacking all your parts from how you took them off. That way you know which way they go. One of the things that we're gonna try and do is have these lessons learned. So for one of the first lessons learned for this N20 turbo is when you put the new turbo on the manifold, there's one bolt that goes right above the coolant lines, the coolant feed and the coolant return line. Make sure that nut is on before you secure the coolant lines to the turbo, otherwise it can fall, and if it falls, it's a nightmare. So that's the big lesson learned on that turbo job for the N20.
All right, first start after the new turbo.
Oh yeah, it gives a nice
yeah.
little kick. Like
You're in sport right now?
Yeah.
Okay, over there.
So 1500, it's like gets.
Yeah, that's normal. Yeah,
Woo! That's actually, you know,
yeah, right?
that's not bad at
Yeah.
all.
So it's feeling normal. It's feeling like the car's coming on boost. This is Alex from
AS, right?
AS Wrap. Sorry about that.
I
gotta
always mess it up.
I gotta get that off the top of my head now. But he wants to get a feel for how these engines feel, considering he's going to be putting this in his 240.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard about that, go check the channel. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, it's like a different feeling,
for the
right?
weight of the car, it moves.
Yeah, it moves all right.
It actually moves. I'm pretty impressed.
All right, so Joel has been driving a Camry, so even this will feel decent.
Oh, shit.
There we go.
That was a partial throttle?
Well, it wasn't full.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of...
Because otherwise, it doesn't. Not like you could give it a 60 punch and be like, "Wow!" Like that's not what it's about.
Right.
It's all about you left a stoplight
Yeah.
hanging with a Model 3 for like a half second.
You know what sucks? You know what sucks?
The second
Is-
notebook.
The half second.
Feeling.
Yeah.
Is,
Not bad for a little 4,
oh,
right? Now it's waking up.
it's legit.
All right, guys, that'll be it for this video. We did save this F30. Next is going to be exterior polish, and we're going to restore the interior. It really doesn't need a whole lot, but it just goes to show that you could buy a non-runner that almost seems like it's completely blown and get it up and running if you're willing to DIY yourself. And I figured I want to document me fixing these cars. I want to get it all on camera. This may seem a little redundant or may not seem like a traditional DIY where I'm covering everything in detail, but I have covered it in detail in the past. I will link to that in the description. So look forward to the exterior detail next. If this is the first video you're catching on my end, please consider subscribing. If you liked it, please give it a like so rank higher. Thanks for watching.